Today's story isn't just about a viral moment. It's about a masterclass in presence delivered by none other than Sylvester Stallone. What started as a routine interview at a tech summit turned into something unforgettable, a moment so raw, so real, it stopped a room full of industry elites in their tracks. It was the final evening of the Futurefront Leadership Summit at the sleek, glass-walled Lumen Tech Conference Center in downtown Austin. The atmosphere was electric. Startup founders milled about with lanyards bouncing on their chests, investors compared notes over espresso shots, and social media influencers huddled near the LED-lit stage, phones at the ready. Everything was running like clockwork, the kind of polished chaos only elite conferences master. On stage, the sleek armchairs were set, branded signage gleamed, and the production team whispered last-minute cues into headsets. The main event of the night, a live-streamed fireside chat, was hyped as a light-hearted closer to the tech-heavy schedule. A conversation between the charismatic host Elliot Vance, a 36-year-old tech mogul and podcast darling, and a surprise guest teased only as a living legend. When Sylvester Stallone emerged from backstage, wearing a tailored charcoal blazer and an unassuming smile, the room's energy shifted instantly. Gasps turned into applause, and phones shot up in waves. This wasn't the usual summit speaker. Stallone shook Vance's hand and took his seat with the slow ease of a man who's walked into thousands of rooms like this, but tonight was different. Vance leaned in, ready to charm and spar, his tone playful. The audience, prepped for punchlines and Hollywood anecdotes, expected nothing more than a few jokes and a promotional nod to Stallone's latest project. No one, not the moderators, not the social media team, not even the front row of eager VCs, was expecting what would follow. What began as a routine PR moment would soon become the most replayed, dissected, and discussed highlight of the entire summit. A moment where a veteran actor, in a room full of disruption chasers and image managers, would quietly remind everyone what real presence looks like when it doesn't try to impress, only to speak. The tension didn't begin on stage. It started quietly 5 days earlier in an interview most of the tech world had probably overlooked. Sylvester Stallone, during a brief sit-down with The Independent, was asked a standard question about leadership in a modern world. His answer was anything but standard. "Sometimes you need disruption to clear the rot, like a controlled demolition," he said. "That's why wrecking balls exist." The quote hit the internet like a spark in dry brush. Within hours, social media platforms exploded with speculation. Some interpreted it as a veiled nod to Donald Trump, others as a critique of the Silicon Valley echo chamber, and still others simply saw it as vintage Stallone, brash, unfiltered, and unapologetic. But Stallone didn't tweet a clarification. He didn't issue a follow-up. He let the quote hang in the air like smoke after a punch. And in today's reactionary climate, silence often speaks louder than noise. In the days that followed, clips circulated, hashtags formed, and think pieces sprang up, dissecting whether Stallone had gone political or was simply telling it straight. Podcasts debated his intent. Comment sections turned into battlefields. Yet Stallone remained silent, fueling the intrigue even more. The producers at Futurefront saw an opportunity, or a risk, depending on how you framed it. Originally booked as a nostalgic, crowd-pleasing closer to the summit, Stallone's appearance was now loaded with potential. Host Elliot Vance, known for his sharp wit and viral soundbites, teased the crowd on X with a cryptic post. "We've got Rocky in the house, let's see if he can still take a punch." The stakes had quietly changed. What was supposed to be a laid-back Q&A with a Hollywood icon now carried the tension of a live wire. Would Stallone clarify his comment? Double down? Get defensive? In an industry obsessed with optics, every camera would be trained not just on what Stallone said, but how he said it. For Vance, it was a chance to generate a viral moment. For Stallone, it was something else entirely. He wasn't there to defend, he wasn't there to perform, and that's what made it dangerous. Because when a man isn't playing the game, you can't predict his next move. The lights dimmed, and a pulsing intro track rolled over the auditorium as Elliot Vance strolled on stage, wireless mic clipped, smile sharp as ever. With the practiced ease of a man who'd hosted hundreds of tech summits and talk panels, he welcomed the crowd, cracked a few jokes about AI replacing CEOs, and teased a few jabs at crypto investors. The audience laughed politely, sipping on cocktails and checking their notifications. Then came the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him as Rocky Balboa, Rambo, and now, the man who thinks a wrecking ball might be good for leadership. Please welcome Sylvester Stallone. The crowd roared. Phones lit up the room like flashbulbs. Stallone stepped out calmly, giving a modest wave. He wore a crisp charcoal blazer over a black t-shirt. Nothing flashy, but unmistakably Stallone. He looked like someone who had nothing left to prove, and knew it. They shook hands. Elliot leaned in with that signature grin, the kind that made him a hit on late-night podcasts and viral panels. "So, Sly," he began, "tell me, what's tougher, going 10 rounds with Ivan Drago or surviving the headlines after that quote?" Laughter rippled through the room. Stallone chuckled, slow and dry. "Depends who's throwing the punches," he said. Vance nodded, pleased, pushing forward. "Let's be honest," he continued. "Some folks are saying you dropped that wrecking ball comment just to stir the pot. You looking to demolish Hollywood, Washington, or Silicon Valley?" He delivered it with a smirk and a raised eyebrow. More laughter followed, but it was thinner now, edged with curiosity. Stallone's expression didn't change much. He shifted in his seat, looked out over the crowd for a beat, and then turned back to Elliot. "You really want to go there this early?" he asked, not unkindly but with a weight behind it. The crowd quieted slightly. Vance, sensing a shift, laughed again, though this time it landed a little flatter. "Hey, just setting the stage," he said. Stallone offered a small nod, calm and measured. "Stage is set," he replied. "Question is, what are we actually talking about? Leadership, truth, or just clicks?" The laughter stopped completely. The room, just minutes earlier buzzing with surface-level energy, now leaned in. Something was happening, and everyone could feel it. The tone had changed. The silence after Stallone's last line wasn't awkward, it was electric. Elliot Vance shifted in his chair, blinking just a little too long before forcing out a half laugh. "Okay, fair," he said, tapping his note card like it held the next zinger. But Stallone didn't wait. His voice, gravelly and slow, cut through the tension with surgical precision. "Look," he said, "I've seen a lot of stages. Most of them were movie sets, some of them were real life, and the difference between the two," he paused, letting the silence stretch. "In real life, there's no retake. You either stand for something when it counts, or you don't." The audience was dead still. Vance tried to jump in with a quick "sure," but Stallone raised one finger, not aggressively, just deliberately, like a man who'd been interrupted too many times in his life. The gesture wasn't threatening, it was commanding. The kind of move that says, "Let me finish." "You asked about the wrecking ball thing," Stallone continued, locking eyes with Vance. "Here's the truth, I wasn't talking about Trump. I wasn't talking about Hollywood. I was talking about systems, about comfort zones, about people sitting in padded chairs pretending to lead while everything around them crumbles." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Vance adjusted his mic, visibly caught off guard. Stallone leaned back, hands resting calmly on his thighs. "Sometimes, you gotta tear something down to build something better. That doesn't make you a destroyer. That makes you a builder with courage." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it hit hard. A few claps started up on the left side of the room, hesitant at first, then louder. It wasn't the usual applause for a clever punchline, it was something else. Recognition. Vance blinked again, trying to recover. "So, what, you think tech needs a wrecking ball?" he asked, the edge returning to his voice. Stallone smiled, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "I think tech needs to remember what it started for," he said, "and who it forgot along the way." The room inhaled. Now the moment wasn't about a quote, it wasn't about politics or controversy, it was about a man who'd lived through more reinventions than most people in that room had, product launches, and who, with a few steady sentences, had flipped the power dynamic entirely. Elliot Vance, the host known for controlling conversations, was no longer leading it. Stallone wasn't performing, he was owning the room, with nothing but honesty, stillness, and a voice that knew the value of restraint. And in that restraint was something more powerful than provocation: clarity. The shift wasn't immediate, it was subtle, like a curtain being slowly pulled back to reveal something no one expected to see. After Stallone's last line, the audience wasn't just listening, they were paying attention. You could feel it. Phones were lowered, eyes were locked in. Even the photographers along the aisles, who had been casually snapping away, paused. Sylvester Stallone leaned forward in his chair, elbows resting lightly on his knees, not trying to dominate the space, just owning it without effort. "I've spent 50 years making characters who stand for something," he said, voice even, eyes steady. "Not perfect guys, but men who didn't back down. Loyalty, courage, persistence. You know why those characters stick?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Because they mean something, even when the world forgets how." The words weren't flashy, they weren't rehearsed, but the truth in them settled over the room like gravity. Stallone wasn't here to sell a show. He wasn't defending a position. He was stripping away every layer of performance people had come to expect from public figures and revealing something much rarer: conviction without pretense. Across the stage, Elliot Vance sat quieter now, his posture less performative. He glanced at his cue cards, but it was clear the moment had gone off script, and the audience was glad for it. Stallone continued, his tone low but magnetic. "You say something honest these days and people flinch. They scramble to twist it, frame it, cancel it, market it. They want to know your angle, your strategy. I didn't say that line to be viral. I said it because I believe it." That last sentence hit like a drum beat. More applause now, spontaneous, from different corners of the room. This wasn't the kind of clapping that comes from studio lights or warm-up coaches. It was the kind that builds when a room full of high achievers realizes they're being challenged, not by a disruptor, but by a survivor. Cameramen on the sides shifted forward instinctively, zooming in, sensing the moment. Behind them, even the production crew, seasoned pros who had seen 1,000 celebrity interviews, had stilled. One grip whispered to another, "He's not acting, is he?" The reply came with a shake of the head. "Nope, this is real." And that's what made it land. Stallone wasn't shouting, he wasn't delivering a monologue, he was simply speaking truth in a room where truth usually gets dressed up or watered down. And the impact wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional. People felt it in their chest, like someone had finally said what they didn't know they needed to hear. It was the stillness in Stallone's delivery, the weight of lived experience behind every word. It didn't feel like a performance, it felt like a conversation with history. The crowd wasn't just engaged, they were leaning forward, drawn in, not by spectacle, but by the rare experience of someone saying exactly what they mean, without fear of consequence. The rules of the conversation had changed, and everyone in the room knew it. By now, Elliot Vance was no longer the conductor of the conversation, he was a passenger trying to grip the rails. His usual rhythm of question, smirk, punchline had dissolved under Stallone's calm, grounded presence. You could see it in the way Elliot shuffled his cue cards, his fingers twitching with uncertainty. Desperate to steer things back toward safer territory, he cracked a smile and leaned in. Okay, he said with forced levity. "But don't you think sometimes comments like yours, especially political ones, are better left off the main stage?" It was a lifeline disguised as a jab, an attempt to corner Stallone back into celebrity small talk. But the response that came next only widened the gulf. Stallone didn't blink. He didn't take the bait. "That's the problem, Elliot," he said, quietly but firmly. "We keep politics off the main stage, but we let fear take center spotlight, so we end up with nothing real being said at all." The sentence didn't rise in volume, but it cut deeper than any soundbite Elliot had prepared. There was a long pause, too long for a show used to fast beats. And then it happened. Applause. Not a scattered few claps, but a building wave, starting from the back of the room and rolling forward like a tide. The energy had shifted, decisively. Elliot's face tightened for a flash before resetting into a diplomatic grin, but it was clear to everyone watching he'd lost control. This wasn't his segment anymore, it wasn't even his show. Stallone wasn't aggressive, and that's what made it worse for Elliot. He hadn't been outshouted or insulted, he'd been outclassed. The veteran actor wasn't just responding, he was reframing the entire premise. You could see the moment Elliot realized it. His questions stopped being sharp and started being cautious. He glanced to the producers off stage, likely hoping for some kind of redirect or bailout, but there was none coming. He was face to face with a man who had nothing to prove and zero interest in playing a part. Stallone didn't need control of the room, he had its respect. From backstage, the production crew whispered into headsets, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the moment breathe. Social media managers scrambled to clip the soundbite. Phones in the audience were already up, recording the moment in real time, and in the room, Elliot Vance sat back slightly in his chair, realizing what the audience already knew. He was no longer the center of the story. Stallone was, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. With quiet conviction, unwavering focus, and the one thing no host can fake: presence. It came without fanfare, without setup, and without the cadence of someone trying to go viral, and that's exactly why it did. After a beat of silence, Sylvester Stallone looked out over the audience, his voice low but deliberate. "I'm not trying to be right," he said. "I'm just trying to be real." And in a room full of filters, real echoes. The words landed like a pin dropping in a cathedral. For a moment no one moved. Then came the eruption. Applause, whistles, and a few hummed who stood instinctively, not even realizing they were doing it. The crew backstage scrambled to mark the timestamp. This was it. The clip, the line, the moment that would light up feeds across TikTok, X, and YouTube within the hour. Elliot Vance, now visibly trying to keep pace, managed a tight smile, nodding as if to say touche, but the tone of the room had fully turned. Stallone wasn't just delivering a clever line, he was delivering something people didn't know they were starving for. Clarity without spin, honesty without agenda. It wasn't a mic drop, it was something cleaner, something more permanent. You could feel people filing it away, not just for retweets, but for their own conversations later. Backstage, someone whispered, "That's the quote." And they weren't wrong. Within minutes, phones across the auditorium buzzed with alerts. Clips started circulating with subtitles, then edits, then reaction videos. The viral moment wasn't a surprise joke or a celebrity meltdown, it was a sentence said softly by a man who didn't care if you liked it, only that you heard it. In that instant, Stallone had done what few ever manage in public discourse. He didn't win the room with volume or force. He won it with truth, and the internet was already making sure no one missed it. Within hours of the summit's closing session, the internet lit up like a wildfire. The clip of Sylvester Stallone delivering the now viral line, "I'm not trying to be right, I'm just trying to be real." And in a room full of filters, real echoes began spreading across platforms with astonishing speed. On TikTok, influencers stitched their reactions, wide-eyed and nodding in approval. On X, users argued over the meaning, some calling it the best unscripted moment of the year, others debating Stallone's intentions, but regardless of opinion, one thing was clear. People were talking, podcasts broke format to discuss it, news outlets that normally ignored entertainment ran headlines like, "Stallone shifts the narrative at Tech Summit." And when realness becomes revolutionary, even late-night hosts who'd usually trade in snark were quoting him, half seriously, half in awe. What stood out wasn't just the content of what he said, it was how he carried it. Viewers online echoed the sentiment again and again. He wasn't trying to trend, that's why it worked. At a bar in Chicago, a local news channel played the clip on loop during their segment on media moments that matter. In a Phoenix high school, a civics teacher played the exchange in class, calling it an example of discourse without defensiveness. Across the country, across age groups, people who didn't necessarily agree with Stallone's politics or background were still sharing the video, not for the message, but for the manner in which it was delivered. Calm, composed, unapologetically human. Memes appeared within hours. Edits of the moment were synced to dramatic soundtracks. One creator overlaid it with black and white footage of Stallone as Rocky, training in silence. Another paired it with bold text, reading, "Authenticity isn't outdated, it's just rare." The response wasn't just viral, it was visceral. People weren't merely reposting, they were reflecting. It hit something deeper than entertainment. It touched identity. Meanwhile, at the Lumentech Conference Center, producers and organizers were stunned. Engagement on the summit's live stream shattered previous records. Their YouTube replay of the Stallone segment racked up millions of views in less than 24 hours. Internally, they called it the Stallone effect, a moment so grounded in authenticity that it bypassed marketing, branding, and PR altogether. One junior producer was overheard saying, "This was the first time we didn't have to package a moment. He delivered it whole." In a world addicted to performance, Stallone had done the one thing algorithms couldn't predict. He spoke from a place that didn't need validation, and that, ironically, became the most validated moment of the entire event. Backstage, the atmosphere felt strangely reverent, like the final moments after a powerful theater performance. The hum of conversation was low, almost respectful. Sylvester Stallone moved through the corridor with quiet ease, nodding to crew members and stagehands, many of whom offered subtle gestures of thanks, fist bumps, shoulder taps, even just silent nods of respect. The viral momentum was already obvious. Phones buzzed in palms. Clips were being sent around the room faster than anyone could keep up, but Stallone seemed unaffected, as if the weight of the moment hadn't quite landed on him, or maybe he was just used to carrying weight others couldn't see. Elliot Vance approached him near the green room. No camera crew, no mic, just two men outside the glow of the stage. Gone was the smirk, the showman polish. He looked humbled. "Didn't expect to get schooled tonight," he said with a sheepish half-grin. Stallone glanced at him, then smiled. "Not smug, not gloating, just real." "You didn't get schooled," he replied. "We just had a real conversation. That's rare." "Don't waste it." Vance nodded, eyes cast downward for a beat before looking back. It was a moment of mutual recognition, not of victory and defeat, but of truth finding its way through a format built for fluff. Just then, one of the summit's junior producers ran up, phone in hand, eyes wide. "It's trending in 12 countries already," she said breathlessly. "Clips are everywhere. You just blew up the summit." Stallone looked at her, then at Vance, then gave a quiet shrug. "It's not about blowing up," he said. "It's about landing something that sticks." There was no urgency in his step as he walked away, no posturing, no dramatic exit, just calm, steady movement, like someone who knew that moments like this didn't need a bow or a speech to matter. The hallway stretched quiet behind him, echoing with the quiet weight of something rare. Presence. Backstage, the atmosphere felt strangely reverent, like the final moments after a powerful theater performance. The hum of conversation was low, almost respectful. Sylvester Stallone moved through the corridor with quiet ease, nodding to crew members and stagehands, many of whom offered subtle gestures of thanks, fist bumps, shoulder taps, even just silent nods of respect. The viral momentum was already obvious. Phones buzzed in palms. Clips were being sent around the room faster than anyone could keep up. You could hear whispered phrases. "Did you hear what he said?" And "that was real." But Stallone seemed unaffected, as if the weight of the moment hadn't quite landed on him. Or maybe he was just used to carrying weight others couldn't see. Elliot Vance approached him near the green room. No camera crew, no mic, just two men outside the glow of the stage. Gone was the smirk, the showman polish. He looked humbled. "Didn't expect to get schooled tonight," he said with a sheepish half-grin. Stallone glanced at him, then smiled. Not smug, not gloating, just real. "You didn't get schooled," he replied. "We just had a real conversation. That's rare." "Don't waste it." Vance nodded, eyes cast downward for a beat before looking back. It was a moment of mutual recognition, not of victory and defeat, but of truth finding its way through a format built for fluff. No posturing, no power play, just clarity. Just then, one of the summit's junior producers ran up, phone in hand, eyes wide. "It's trending in 12 countries already," she said breathlessly. "Clips are everywhere. You just blew up the summit." Stallone looked at her, then at Vance, then gave a quiet shrug. "It's not about blowing up," he said. "It's about landing something that sticks." Then he turned and walked away, not like a man chasing a headline, but like one who had already said what needed saying. No victory lap, no PR pivot, just calm footsteps echoing down a hallway, leaving the noise behind, and somehow, that quiet exit spoke louder than anything else. The lesson from this story is simple but powerful. Authenticity cuts deeper than performance. In a world saturated with curated personas, rehearsed talking points, and viral-for-viral sake moments, Sylvester Stallone reminded everyone that true presence doesn't need a spotlight, it creates one. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't attack, and he didn't posture. He spoke with calm certainty, grounded in lived experience, and that's what disarmed the room. People didn't applaud because he was provocative, they applauded because he was real. The story also highlights a deeper truth. When you stop trying to win the moment, you often end up owning it. Stallone wasn't chasing applause or headlines, and that's precisely why his words resonated. The viral quote wasn't crafted, it was earned. And in doing so, he flipped the script not just on the host, but on the audience's expectations. Whether you're in tech, entertainment, or just trying to find your voice in a noisy world, this moment teaches us that courage isn't always loud, it's often measured, intentional, and delivered without apology. And perhaps most importantly, when you speak from a place that doesn't need validation, that's when people finally listen.